smell was also similar to a caf latte, but he knew that both coffee and lattes existed in this world. Incidentally, Aints didn't he know what a macchiato tasted like. It went without saying, but he couldn't drink. He experimented once, but the contents simply sloshed out the bottom of his jaw. He couldn't sense any taste at all, so there was literally no point. Nonetheless, the reason he ordered it was that he figured it was appropriate. The drink only seemed to be available at high-class establishments. Wiping away some non-existent sweat, he asked Narberl an obvious question. "Nabe, what does a macchiato taste like?" he asked, because he knew she had one before. For a little while, she looked like she was thinking it over. Her expression was the same as someone who wondered how best to describe the flavor of coffee to someone who had never drunk it. It is similar to a caf shake latte. But I don't enjoy the faint condensed milk aftertaste. I see. Sounds tasty. Shake latte, never heard of it. It is probably something original to this world. I would rate it as not bad. Just as Aints hummed thoughtfully, their drinks arrived. Go ahead. If neither of us touches our drinks, it'll seem weird. He'd gotten so used to his helmeted lifestyle in the kingdom that he said this completely forgetting how unnatural it was to keep his helmet on even when someone brought him a drink. Thank you. It is fine if you keep drinking, but please listen. I am thinking about taking 2 days to see the imperial capital. I heard the central market is surprisingly well stocked, enough that you can have fun just walking around and browsing. And there is also the northern market. I heard it sells mainly magic items, and that adventurers often go there. That information was obtained from the Eight Fingers organization, which they now dominated. There was more underground intelligence, but Aints wasn't planning on sticking his own nose into those affairs, so he only skimmed the documents. On the third day, let us go to the Adventurers Guild. If possible, I'd like to meet the Empire's Adamantite rank adventurers. If that is impossible, let us do a short, simple job to make ourselves known. It would be best if we could finish within 7 days. Any suggestions? Narberl, who had stopped drinking to listen, shook her head. The imperial capital was a physical manifestation of the Empire's power. It contained many astounding sights, but most visitors marveled at one thing: nearly every road was paved with brick or stone. None of the nearby countries, not even the theocracy, though it was more advanced than most, could match the quality of these roads. Not every city in the empire was similarly outfitted, but seeing the capital was enough for visiting diplomats to understand and admire the empire's potential. The main street was especially grand. One of the imperial capital's largest roads, the main street was connected to the highway. Carriages and horses moved down the center like on ordinary roads, and pedestrians walked on the sides. What set it apart were the various safety provisions. A simple guardrail was built on the boundary between the sidewalk and the street. The sidewalk, being a step up, provided additional protection for pedestrians. Lamps also lined the side of the road. They shone magic light on the streets at night, along with many patrolling knights. Down this street, the safest in the empire, walked a man with a silly grin on his face. He hummed a cheerful tune. He stood about 5'7". He was probably almost 20 years old. He had blonde hair, blue eyes, and healthy tan skin, features you could find anywhere in the empire. He wasn't handsome. He was only average and wouldn't stand out in a crowd. Still, there was something appealing about him. Perhaps it had something to do with the faint, merry smile on his face and the confident way he carried himself. With each step, with each swing of his arms, the sound of chain links rubbing together came from under his fine, immaculate clothes. A perceptive passerby would gather that he was wearing mail. He wore a sword on either hip, short swords based on their length. Knuckle guards covered the grips completely. The scabbards weren't elaborate, but they didn't look cheap. He also wore a blunt weapon, a mace, farther around behind the swords. He had an armor piercer as well. Carrying a weapon or two in this world was only natural, but there weren't many people who had 3 different attack types: piercing, cutting, and crushing at the ready. Someone who knew a thing or two would figure him for an adventurer. Someone who knew a little more would no doubt notice he lacked the plate adventurers usually wore around their necks. This meant he was a worker. Workers were adventurer dropouts. Adventurer jobs were contracted by the guild, investigated, and then assigned to adventurers of suitable rank. The guild screened requests at the earliest stage to make sure they were appropriate. It refused questionable jobs, ones that threatened civilian safety, or involved crime, and sometimes blacklisted the requester. For example, the guild did everything in its power to block requests to procure plants used to make drugs. The guild also rejected jobs that would disrupt the balance of an ecosystem. For example, it wouldn't send adventurers to proactively kill the monster at the top of a forest's food chain. If the monster was killed, the ecosystem's balance would be destroyed. Monsters might then appear outside the forest. The guild wanted to avoid that. Of course, it was a different story if the monster at the top of the food chain left the forest and invaded an area where humans lived. In other words, adventurers were like allies of justice, but pretty ideals alone couldn't make the world go round. There were people who simply wanted money. They were willing to do dangerous jobs for good rewards. There were even people who merely enjoyed killing monsters. Those who pursued darkness rather than light, those who dropped out of the adventurer system, were the ones people called workers, with a mix of scorn and wariness. But that didn't mean everyone who became a worker was that type of person. For example, imagine a boy was seriously injured in a certain village. Could an adventurer who happened to be passing through heal his wounds for free using magic? The answer was no. There was a rule that forbade adventurers from casting healing magic without charging the prescribed fee. Normally, healing fell within the jurisdiction of the shrines. Sick people made an offering to receive the effects of healing spells. If adventurers healed people for free, the shrines wouldn't be able to stay in business. So the shrines made firm requests to the guild to prevent that. Anyone who disagreed with that rule had no choice but to become a worker. From this perspective, the shrines seem almost like villains. But it was precisely because they had revenue from healing that they could work for the people without getting heavily involved in politics. The funds to train priests, exorcise undead, develop new healing spells, and generally make people's lives happier and safer also came from this revenue stream. If adventurers cast healing magic for free, the shrines would end up growing secular and their ideology would be tarnished. Everything has two sides to it, a front and a back. That went for workers as well. Cases of workers who would overhunt for money so they could make cheaper medicine to help people were not non-existent. The grinning man, Hecarim Termite, was a worker by trade. Wonder what I should buy? The list of magic items he wanted was endless. He figured it would be better to prioritize defensive accessories for the moment. There was one more thing he wanted. It was unrelated, but important to him. I'll save up money for that separately, then I'll use what's left to buy magic items for adventures. Or is that backward? I'll buy the items first, and any money left over will go toward that. Hecarim scratched his head. Then he thought, as the one out front, I should raise my magic resistance. Maybe it's time to cut into my savings. But assuming we're going to the Katsi Plain to make some cash exterminating undead, I should be on guard against toxins and stuff. So items that boost resistance to poison, paralysis, and sickness would be better. Magic items were extremely expensive. The types adventurers wanted ones useful in combat tended to cost even more. Unique items fetched prices that kept them out of Hecarim's reach. The items he had in mind weren't so extreme, but they would still cost a normal person's annual pay several times over. It was an expensive shopping trip. He had to decide carefully. His expression was giddy in anticipation of a splurge, but it tightened when his eyes met those of a knight. Two knights stood on the corner, keeping watch over the area. One wore heavy armor, and the other wore light armor. This district, where the shrines to the four gods were located, was known for its strict security. The knights wouldn't question ordinary passers-by, but Hecarim sensed their gazes focusing on the weapons hanging from his hips. He didn't know how it was for adventurers, but as a worker with no support, he definitely didn't want to fight a knight. His wish was heard. He managed to traverse the shrine area without being stopped by the knights comparing faces with wanted flyers. Hecarim definitely had things to hide. Relieved, he shifted his gaze down the road. He saw a peculiar structure quite a ways in the distance. At the same time, he heard a cheer on the wind, along with something like a bloodthirsty battle cry. This unique building could only be found in the imperial capital, the Grand Arena. It was one of the city's most popular sights. He saw his fill of blood in his line of work, so he didn't need to go to the arena. He also wasn't interested in gambling. Therefore, the place held little fascination for him. Still, as one might expect for the most popular entertainment for the masses, for the nobles, it was the theater. They were having a full house, if the cheers were anything to go by. Must be the final round of the main fight, judging from the hubbub. The worker team Hecarim led had appeared once for work in a program where they were pit against a succession of magical beasts. Surrender wasn't allowed in beast fights. In other words, defeat meant death. Of course, people also died in human-on-human battles. There was rarely an arena day that ended without a death. In fact, the more people died, the more feverish the atmosphere. And out of all the deadly events, the tournament was the most popular. Hecarim shrugged. He lost interest completely. He didn't feel like staring at a bloody, reeking battlefield on his day off. Arena events made for good conversation starters in all sorts of places, and that's why he couldn't get it out of his head. He never wanted to go to the arena again, but when he got back later, it wouldn't be a bad idea to ask someone about the events. Making a mental note, Hecarim continued walking down the street. Stores lined both sides. Before long he came upon the familiar sign of the Singing Apple. It was a pub and inn. It was said to have started with a gathering of bards. They played instruments made from apple trees. The interior was surprisingly nice. There were no drafts, and the floors were polished clean. It did cost a fair amount, but it wasn't beyond their means. For Hecarim's group, no, workers in general, one could even say it was the best inn. Certainly, compared to the most high class in the imperial capital had to offer, it was inferior on every level. But those fancy places were perfect for adventurers, not workers. First, most jobs for workers were dirty, so requesters hesitated to visit somewhere conspicuous. On the other hand, basing their operations in a rough part of town could invite trouble. Another reason requesters liked the Singing Apple was that multiple worker teams could stay there. Since there was no guild for workers, like there was for adventurers, people who wanted to hire a team had to track them down. It would have been inconvenient if they were scattered all over the place. One advantage workers had was that by staying at the same inn, they developed a sense of closeness. They ended up avoiding jobs that would involve killing one another. Last, but certainly not least, the food at the Singing Apple was delicious. Hecarim walked through the door with his mind on the evening meal. He thought it would be great if they served his favorite pork stew. The words that leaped into his ears when he went inside were not "welcome back" or "how was your day" from his friends. Which is why I said I don't know, even so it's not like I am her guardian or something. We're not family, how should I know where she is? Aren't you friends? Even if you say you don't know, I can just say, oh I see, and be on my way. This is for work. A man and woman were glaring at each other in the center of the pub and dining hall on the first floor. Hecarim knew the woman very well. Her face wasn't special, and it currently looked hostile. What attracted the most attention was her longer than normal ears. They were only about half as long as an elf's. Yes, she was half elf. Elves are more slender creatures than humans, and it was clear she shared their blood. She was thin overall. Neither her chest nor her backside had any trace of smooth feminine curves. She was flat as a washboard. From her build alone, even up close, she could be mistaken for a man. She wore form-fitting leather armor. She wasn't carrying her usual bow and quiver. Instead, a dagger dangled from her hip. Her name was Amina. She was one of Hecarim's teammates, but the man facing her was someone he didn't know. He was bobbing his head to beg her pardon, but his eyes didn't seem sorry at all. On the contrary, something unpleasant lurked within them. Judging from his humble attitude, though, he didn't seem to be a total idiot. With arms and a chest practically bursting with muscles, his appearance alone made his presence seem like a threat. He was probably someone who wouldn't hesitate to use violence, but he couldn't hope to appeal to Amina by force. Why? Because although she looked delicate, enough ability lurked within her that she could kill a cocky hoodlum with no trouble. But it's like I've been telling you. At this shrill, greatly irritated scream, Hecarim interrupted. Amina, what are you doing? Amina turned around, just then noticing him at the sound of his voice, and looked surprised. It seemed that despite her superior range of senses, she had lost herself in the conversation and failed to sense him. The oversight spoke to how agitated she must have been. What do you want? the man asked in a threatening tone. He clearly considered Hecarim an intruder. His eyes were hostile. It seemed like he might start throwing punches at any moment. But to Hecarim, who had faced ferocious monsters and lived, the man's threats were worth about a wry grin. He's our leader. Oh well then, Hecarim Termite, correct. I've heard so much about you. The man's expression morphed dramatically into an ingratiating smile. Hecarim hated him just a bit. He didn't know why the man had come, but he had made it all the way here to their base. The possibility he didn't know Hecarim was practically non-existent. The threat in the man's voice had likely been to gauge what kind of person Hecarim was. If he backed off even a little, the man probably would have continued in that high-handed vein. Some workers and adventurers had no problem slaying monsters, but were reluctant to face humans. Of course, most of them would take a mile if given an inch and attack to kill. He threatens me to decide who's top dog the moment we meet. I just can't get myself to like this kind of guy. Hecarim knew that it was just one way of negotiating, an obvious technique, but he didn't like that sort of negotiation. He liked his business straightforward with no hidden purposes. SHH. This is an inn, you know. There are other guests here too, so could you keep it down? That's what he said, but actually there were no other guests to be seen, or for that matter employees. It wasn't as if they were hiding. To the workers, this amount of commotion was like a morsel to go with their drinks. It was only by chance that no one was around. Hecarim gave the man a hard stare. It was too much to stand tall against the piercing eyes of a warrior who would have been mithril rank as an adventurer. The stranger shrank, as if he were facing a magical beast. Oh no, no, no. My apologies, but I can't do that. The man lowered his voice slightly and was about to continue. He could do that under Hecarim's gaze, which meant he had to be in some line of work, most likely the violent kind that exercised strength. What in the world is a guy like this doing here? He himself did underworld work, but he didn't know this man, nor did he understand why he should be getting so much attitude from him. The guy definitely didn't seem to be fulfilling a request. Confused, Hecarim softened his eyes and decided to ask the man, "Who are you?" "I came to meet an associate of yours, Mr. Termite, Miss Furt." Only one person by the name of Furt came to mind. As her friend, who had fought through numerous life and death battles with her, that's what Hecarim concluded. So this must be some kind of trouble. Arch. What about her, Arch? Oh right, I was confused for a second. We only ever call her Miss Furt. Arch Ibril Furt, yes, so, what about her? I'd just like a word with her. It's a private matter, so could you tell me what time she'll be back? How should I know? Hecarim ended the conversation gruffly. He was so forceful the man blinked a few times. Is this conversation over? I guess I have no choice. I'll just wait a little, get lost. Hecarim jerked his jaw toward the entrance. The man's eyelids fluttered again. I'll make myself clear. I don't like you, and it doesn't seem like I ever will. I can stand having guys like that anywhere I can see. This is a pub and I am, yeah. You're right, it is a pub. A place where people get drunk and start fights. Hecarim grinned at the man. Relax. Even if you get caught in a brawl and end up seriously wounded, we have a priest who can use healing magic. All you have to do is pay and we'll fix you up. Of course, there's a surcharge. Otherwise the shrines get upset. No way, I want the shrines to send an assassin after us. Emina chimed in, wearing a villainous sneer. But well, for you we can discount it. You'd be grateful for that, wouldn't you? You heard her. Are you trying to threaten us? The man's words trailed off because he saw the worker's expression change dramatically. Hecarim took a big step forward, closing in until their faces filled each other's fields of vision. Threaten who, me? It's not so rare for a fight to break out in a pub, right? I am giving you a friendly warning and you say I am threatening you. Are you trying to start something? Hecarim's face, the veins of his brow bulging, was one of a man who had survived countless life and death battles. Defeated, the other man backed up a step, but clicked his tongue as his last act of defiance. Then he set off hurriedly toward the door. He was frantically trying to keep up appearances, but it was clear at a glance that just beneath the surface he was spooked. When he reached the door, he turned his head and snapped at Hecarim and Emina. Tell the Furt girl that her time is up. Yeah. At Hecarim's near growl, the man practically tripped over his feet, exiting the inn. Once the troublesome roughneck was gone, Hecarim's expression went completely back to normal. The change was so abrupt that if he said he had just been pulling faces for effect, it would have been believable. And in reality, Emina gave him a round of applause. So what was that about? Not sure. He only asked the same stuff you heard just now. Ah man, then we probably should have gotten more out of him first. Dang it. He put a palm over his face. Can't we just ask Arch when she gets back? But I don't really want to go poking into her business. Well, I get that, but you're our leader, so suck it up. I'll exercise my authority as leader to have you ask her as a fellow woman. Give me a break. I don't want to do it either. They winced at each other. Among both adventurers and workers, a few things were commonly understood to be inappropriate. First, asking about or investigating one another's pasts. Second, displaying excessive desires too openly. Since many people became workers out of ambition, a little greed couldn't be helped. But when it was blatantly over the top, there was a danger they would stop functioning as team players.